So I guess I'll lead off with a little bit about me so you know who I am. I sort of wander around the world breaking things. Mostly I do this when people ask me to. Most of the things I break are big, complex technical and social systems, and I look at how they fail and try to make them fail in ways that are more useful to people. Some of the time this is computer systems. I do a lot of computer security work. It's also legal systems and looking at infrastructural features and a lot of things. But I guess where I want to start, and this is probably a reasonable place to kick this off, is, this century is actually looking pretty grim. We've got a lot of very large, long-term catastrophes that are sort of rolling down on us. And, it's not very clear that we're going to make it through a lot of them, that all of what we might colloquially call modern civilization is really going to have a very good play this century. Whether that's fossil fuel exhaustion or anthropocentric climate disruption or ocean acidification or biodiversity loss or scarcities in many of the metals that we use. There are a lot of different catastrophes that are sort of coming for our modern industrial and civilizational base. And we might get lucky. We'll probably dodge a couple of them, and we might even solve a couple of them. But at least any one of them is enough to do for us, and we're probably not going to dodge all of them. And that means we're going to be looking at some very different civilizational outcomes at the end of that process. Now, if we all started working together in a prompt enough fashion, we might be able to actually do a lot about many of these issues. And I'm not really that interested in talking about, at least right now, about what the specific actions are, because every crisis has its camp of people who talk about we need to do X to solve Y, this, that. There's those conversations are happening, which is very good. I mean, those conversations are really important. But what we're not hearing so much about is, I guess, two things. We're not hearing that much, first, about the infrastructure that these things interact with. Infrastructure is one of those things that's really boring for most people. Most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I'm guessing that there are probably a lot of exceptions in this audience. If you look at the state, and this is especially true in America, if you look at the state of American infrastructure and the infrastructure that we as Americans depend on, it's actually deeply terrifying. We have a bunch of colliding things, and the collisions here are indicative of the larger problems that we're facing as well. There are sort of a series of gaps. So we all went and built a bunch of infrastructure after World War II, and we've been depending on that infrastructure since. Unfortunately, we haven't been maintaining it very much because maintenance budgets, maintenance is expensive, and maintenance budgets pull from money that you'd be using for new infrastructure. So there's this competitive efficiency over time that sort of slowly, gradually decreases maintenance budgets. And then sometimes they fall off a cliff, like the 25% reduction in maintenance spending that we've had in the past decade. There's also an issue of capacity. A lot of this infrastructure was built when it was cheaper for us to build things. It's gotten a lot more expensive for us to build things, so we've stopped building new infrastructure. A lot of this infrastructure was designed under different conditions than we are now facing, right? This infrastructure was not designed to be flexible. The highway system was designed with the assumption that cars would be the primary means of getting people around, and there aren't really that many things that you can repurpose a highway into. I mean, sure, you can put buses on it, but it's not really designed to be an efficient bus collector structure, just from where they go, et cetera, at fairly basic levels. And a lot of this leads back to a problem in terms of time scale, that we have been thinking about infrastructure. Like the reason why efficiency is used as an excuse to stop doing maintenance. You stop doing maintenance because, well, on any given 5-year window, it makes total economic sense to stop doing maintenance. Maintenance is expensive. The catastrophe won't happen for at least another 10 or 15 years. Surely someone will get around to fixing that bridge in Minnesota before it falls down. Oops. So, and this is where we see the tie over into the bigger picture stuff, because a lot of this is about failures in systems of governance. Systems of governance are even more boring than infrastructure, but that's actually where a lot of our really critical problems are coming from right now. So the longest sort of common mindset window that I've really been able to find anyone thinking on is about a 20-year lifespan. And it turns out civil servants are really great, because 20 years is half a civil servant's career. And by the time they're sort of far enough along to have a big picture of the world, they're thinking to the end of their career, what do I want to get done before I retire? That's 20 years. You know, if you're an elected official, you're thinking about your next term in office. You're not really thinking beyond that, because you need to think about getting elected 4 years. If you're a company, you're thinking about next year's profits, year and a half at most. Honestly, probably you're just thinking about next quarter's profits. So that's 3 months. And a lot of the decisions that actually affect us are supply chain decisions that happen, 3 weeks, 6 hours, depending on the supply chain. So we have this massive rolling set of time failures, of timescale failures, because what we really need are people thinking at 2 centuries. 2 centuries starts to be sort of a medium amount of time. It's not long-term thinking, but it's at least sort of middle-term thinking. But we have all of these structures which are designed, well, not even designed, which have accidentally emerged that don't permit us to think on those kinds of timescales. Churches turned out to be a really great tool for thinking in the long term. Universities, before they became profit centers for neoliberalism, were also reasonably good at thinking in the long term, because they actually had structures which were intended to last, and they thought of themselves as guardians of knowledge over the centuries. But as the pace of change in knowledge has increased, that stopped. And certainly as they've just become mostly extractive things where nobody really thinks about long-term careers in academia anymore, at least not if they're vaguely realistic. There's a great story out there about Oxford University, realizing that one of the great halls had rot in the beams. It's like, well, this is horrible, because they're these giant 18, 24-inch thick oak beams. Like, we can't replace those. They don't make trees like that anymore. And 6 months later, one of the foresters said, oh yeah, there's this grove of trees on campus that they were planted when we built the hall last time. They're ready now. They were built because we knew that those beams were going to get worms in them. So we planted some trees at the time 2 centuries ago, and now they're big enough to replace those beams. That's weird. That doesn't happen normal places. Oxford is not a normal place. Can you imagine that happening at UCLA? Or Berkeley or wherever? It doesn't happen. But we have a lot of sort of more aggressive issues. I mean, we live under a condition of state capture right now. The notion that we have representative democracy is a very polite fiction, which is sort of used to keep people, sort of feeling okay with their amount of participation in society. Well, I went and I voted, and so I've done my political duty. I can go back to whatever else I do now. Representative democracy as we practice it in the West has comprehensively failed. The U.S. decided a while ago that it's really not acceptable in a modern democracy to have people bribing politicians. Like, this just isn't okay. It's not okay that politicians break the law when they accept bribes. We need to stop this. So we legalized it, and now we call it lobbying, which just solved the problem, right? So we exist in a structure of state capture where it is impossible to do things that operate outside of the time frames of the people who have captured the states that we live with, which means quarters, which means maybe years. So it is impossible to do long-term planning. You have structures of coercive efficiency where a city gets told, well, such and such city closed all their parks and all their homeless shelters and poured that money into tax breaks for industry. And if you don't do it, we're going over there. And this happens every day. This kind of structure. It's big conversations, it's little conversations, but these are the conditions with which we live. A lot of this guilt, well, I don't want to say it's personally the fault of the rich, because really it's the fault of the money that motivates them and that moves them, because a lot of this is the logic of capital, the logic of accumulative monies, the logic of the time sequence by which capital has fallen into as we've moved from mercantilism through the Industrial Revolution, through the capitalization of finance. And we've gotten shorter and shorter time horizons. That said, the people with the money are the ones who are doing this, There are a lot of things that we can do about this, but none of them involve the rich not having to change their lives and change the influence that they have in the world. And by the rich, I mean every one of you, including myself, right? Because the average wage in this world is $2.50 a day. We are all fantastically, filthily, disgustingly rich. And the world caters to our every whim. Not as much as it caters to the whims of a few other people. But, we all had some very nice coffee, right? You know what social equality looks like? Social equality looks like living under the same conditions that the people who grew that coffee live under. Now, our job, if we want to survive this century, is to learn how to live well without massive amounts of money, and to learn how to be poor gracefully. Because right now we're not very good at being poor gracefully. If you're poor in the West, your life is hell. If you're poor anywhere, your life is some approximation of hell, but especially here, and especially in America, especially in the richest country in the world, we treat our poor the worst of anywhere, and we push that oppression out as aggressively as possible. Conviviality is one of the big things that we're missing that isn't just about income redistribution, right? Because it's not just about redistributing agency equally among everyone, but it's also about making sure that without depending on massive amounts of money, we get to live well. And live well doesn't mean, having the lifestyle that pays for the very nice cameras and the air flights and all of the rest of it. Living well means actually enjoying your life. It means, having, a nice dinner. It means having time to spend with friends. It's impossible right now to go and spend 20 years thinking about a problem in America, because you can't afford to do it unless you already have a massive pile of money. And if you have a massive pile of money, the fact that you have that massive pile of money is going to change the way you think about those problems. This is what the profit extraction of academia has cost us, among other things. It's cost us the existence of any place where people can go to just think and see things out of that time horizon, and not need to publish a paper every 3 months, not need to publish a blog entry 6 times a day. There are some thoughts that you just need to sit with for a very long time, and the issues that we are hitting are about those thoughts. They're about us not having time to sit and think and understand the consequences of our actions over time. A lot of these problems can be traced to, in one way or another, a betrayal of trust. It's a concentration of agency, and that means a betrayal of trust in the notion that, well, I'll be fine if I trust these other people to do the right thing. No, instead I'm going to take their agency away because I can, because I don't trust them. And a lot of that is about building up cross-class contact. It's about building experience, and this is one of the reasons why I do travel as much as I do. It's about bridging communities. It's about becoming sort of one humanity, because it used to be fine. Well, it used to be not fine. It used to be tolerable that we were fragmented into lots of little pockets, whether they were nations or religions or states or whatever, because our reach didn't actually go that far. It wasn't a problem because our reach didn't exceed our vision, and we don't have global vision right now, but we do have global reach. So that's sort of the shape of the problem. There are kind of two threads, and I said I wasn't just gonna focus on the problem, so I'll try to honor that. There are two threads that I'm looking at a lot as far as how we get back out of this. So decentralization is interesting, not because it's a panacea, but because decentralized structures are more difficult to capture with the existing tactics that we're seeing deployed. It's a lot harder to capture control of a cooperative market than it is to capture control of an entity with a single owner. And so given that a lot of what we need to do is redistribute agency back out, decentralization is a fairly natural place to start. Now, it's not enough. You also have to ensure that you get the kind of liberatory potential woven into the ethics that you intend to decentralize, because if you don't have both, it doesn't work. But the decentralization is a prerequisite. Now, what an institution does, whether it's a government or a corporation, is it basically executes a bunch of processes. And then it has a certain amount of tacit memory. The tacit memory is all the stuff that it doesn't write down about how the processes actually work and its understanding of the world. That one's a little bit harder, but on the process side, it actually turns out to be very easy, relatively speaking, to turn any given set of organizational processes into a set of protocols that a distributed, decentralized group of people can execute. Now, you still need an institution. You still need someone to hang on to that knowledge and say, hey, this is how this works, this is how that works, whether it's teaching new people who come into the network or providing a space for reflection inside that decentralized group. But that gives you a decentralization of agency, and that's one of your prerequisites. Now, there's a lot of technical stuff that you can do to support decentralization, although in the end, a lot of it isn't strictly required. But technology can be enabling here, and this is, I'm not a techno-optimist exactly, but I do think that technology influences society, and society can shape the technology that we build, and we can have a positive feedback loop here if we decide to commit to building the technology that gives us the world that we want. Most of the governance systems that we have right now that have been so thoroughly captured were designed when horses were a really fast way of moving information around a country. That's not true anymore, which means that we have basically a lot of slop, a lot of time slop in the system. Now, what's happened is that the media and the people who would influence and reshape that system have absorbed all of that time slop, which is why we have the 24-hour news cycle and all these other things, despite having this much slower political system. We can accelerate the actual governance system up to something that's a little bit closer to the speed at which information moves now, and it drives out a lot of that attention, which is frankly kind of hostile. Now, obviously, we have to do so in a way which gives us time to think about these decisions and that kind of thing. It's not perfect, but you can think of that time slot as room to make more, or room to make less efficient systems. Representative democracy, the notion of having representatives, is a system of efficiency, right? It's a system of, well, not everybody can have input to every problem, which is necessary when you have slow communication. When you have fast communication, more people can have input, more people can have agency, a system becomes less harder to capture. So we need less efficient government. And I know it's kind of hilarious to stand here in California and champion less efficient government, but we need government which is less efficient in a liberatory way, not government which is less efficient in a way that encourages that kind of capture, which is what we have now. Just the technical side isn't enough, though. We also need social prototyping, and this is something that isn't done very much right now. You know, we basically build technical systems and just sort of say, well, whatever the system ends up meaning in society, that's fine, because it's technology and it's disruption, and that's good, right? Yeah. There's a whole pile of unemployed people out there who'd be happy to talk to you about your opinions about disruptive technology if you believe in that, which I assume most of you here don't. But we need to have systems that let us look at the structures that we're going to deploy before they're deployed at mass scale, before it's too late to change our minds on what they actually ended up meaning. So one of the other random worlds I play in is the Scandinavian LARP scene, Scandinavian live action role-playing scene, which is this hilarious, wacky little corner of the world. And they started out the same way all of the other LARPers did, running around in the woods and hitting each other with foam swords, and you know, and it was exactly that. And then, because Scandinavia is a kind of a communalist society in ways that we aren't, as people grew up, they were like, well, what if we tell real stories? You know, because we're taking this stuff fairly seriously already, and we already have the notion that we can dive into emotions because everybody is here to support everyone else's story, not to get to play the hero. And they started telling stories about things which actually mean things. The first game I played in that community was called Just Lit 11. It was a 3-day game, played outside of Oslo, but set in a beach house or a summer house on the Hudson over 3 consecutive 4th of July parties in 82, 83, and 84 in the gay scene at the start of the AIDS epidemic. And it was played with the level of seriousness that topic deserves. And it was an incredibly difficult and an incredibly moving experience. It taught me a lot about what parts of the history of the queer community that I'm part of actually meant. Because I sort of had an intellectual understanding or whatever. But an intellectual understanding is very different than, not you, but someone else having borrowed your body for a little while to bury a friend of theirs that they'd known for 10 years. Now, that was about understanding what a piece of history meant, but the same toolkit gets used for thinking about what new social structures mean. It interests me because it's the first time I've seen anywhere this kind of high fidelity, emotionally close, first person, present tense, plural approach to storytelling that lets you really live a structure in the world and figure out what it means. And I think that toolkit, combined with an understanding of decentralization, combined with a thorough effort at real meaningful governance change, and not like lobbying Congress or trying to get news laws passed, but building things in the world, actively going out and building things. Because a lot of the things that we care about, a lot of the things that are causing these massive, horrifyingly terrible long-term problems that are going to kill us all, are infrastructure. And what we need are new infrastructures that change the way the world works. And it turns out that a lot of the time you don't have to wait to ask anybody's permission to build new infrastructure. Certainly Uber didn't. Now, Uber and the labor market might have a few things to say to each other if we want to talk about liberatory effects of technology. But, you don't have to be Uber. You don't even have to be Zipcar. You can build systems which have good economic and ecological benefits, leave value on the table, promote decentralization, promote collective community decision making. And you can do so without just sort of blindly pushing stuff out there because it's disruptive and different, and you can actually understand the impact you're having on the world if you take it upon yourself to say, gee, my kids' kids, my friends' kids, whoever, our species, those other people who are human, whose suffering matters just as much as mine, if not more, they need to have just as much of a chance as I've got. They need to have the nice lifestyle where they get to sit under avocado trees and have nice toys. And, you know, we can build this. But first it's about collective responsibility, and it's about thinking about the impacts that our actions have on the world.